Teachers who ended up working at schools that you attended as a student. What behind-the-scenes secrets, dirt, or teachers' lounge gossip did you learn that you were clueless of as a student? The biggest surprise for me was that the teacher I adored as a kid is actually a douche. I loved him as a teacher when I was 14 years old, but I can't stand him as a colleague. All the staff hated the deputy principal as much as the students did, if not more. My third-grade teacher was killed when her car got stuck on the train tracks. Her husband was the principal. After I found out through parents that everyone was starting to suspect that the principal was seeing one of the teacher's aides. It was one of those uncomfortable things where a lot of the moms were after him because he was single, and so they were incredibly jealous and petty towards this particular aide. Years later, I found out the principal and this aide got married. Years after that, when they were both gone, I started working with my old elementary school. And that's when I found out the truth. That the aide and principal had started having an affair back when my third-grade teacher was still alive. She found out about their affair, and her death was not an accident. She was actually on the phone with the aide when she purposely drove her car onto the train tracks and killed herself. I interned at my old elementary school and subbed at the high school. Honestly, wasn't as wild and debaucherous as some folks wish it to be. Biggest revelations: my old music teacher would fall asleep during after-school meetings and professional development with regularity. Sweet fourth-grade teacher actually took no garbage during after-school meetings if someone was trying to push policy or curriculum that made no sense. High school teachers would gossip in teachers' lounge about students, though generally only occasionally in passing. And not always scandalous gossip. Just generally more aware of each student's social life than I'd have ever imagined they'd be. An example would be something like, "How's Steve been today?" Turned in his homework, but it was incomplete. "Didn't really participate today. Heard he and Kristen weren't really talking anymore. Yeah, seems to be going through a rough time now, but I think he's going to be better off in the long run." In hindsight, it was weird to consider that these folks were likely talking about me and my personal life in various regards a few years prior. I always assumed my life in school was relatively insular, but teachers see a lot more than we think. I found out the school I work at has a decommissioned shooting range in the basement. We recently discovered that my girlfriend's teacher, who would occasionally break down crying during class when the kids were being particularly childlike, was dealing with cancer during that time. I didn't end up working at my old school, but I did run into my old guidance counselor, who had since moved districts, at a conference. I was mentioning the teachers I had had, and that the photography teacher always creeped me out. He confirmed that said teacher had been quietly fired for sleeping with students. And this was at a school where my app history teacher was actually married to a former student. Nothing to see here. Marriages and divorces, depressions, cancers, all of that garbage about the teachers that you sometimes suspected but never really knew for sure. Also, teachers can be ruthless when talking about kids, but it's funny as hell. Drinking wine with some of my former teachers was fluffing weird, but 100% would recommend. My mom did her student teaching at the Catholic high school she attended. She didn't know that, while she'd been away at university, one of her favorite teaching nuns had left the order and gotten married. She almost had a heart attack when she recognized Sister Mary Irony in the halls one day and realized she had a solid 7-month pregnant belly. Not a teacher, but I was an IT technician at my high school about 6 years after I graduated. The staff at the school all share stories about students among each other, so they all knew who was good or bad, they knew who was dating who, they knew all the friend groups, they knew about students' social lives. This isn't stuff they'd ever be told directly, just observations. I swear, they knew more about the class than I ever would have as a student as part of the class. Also, as someone else said, it's actually kind of fun to have a beer or drink with your old teachers. Sometimes the ones you become friends with aren't the ones you ever would have thought would be the case when you were in school. That they have a secret basement. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, a female student's nude had been discovered on a flash drive that a male teacher gave to students if they didn't have a flash drive so they could work on projects at home if necessary. Obviously, an investigation went underway and it was found that another student had put the nude on the flash drive, but amidst all the chaos and rampant rumors, it was discovered that the male teacher was having an affair with one of the social studies female teachers, who was also married. Male teacher is still currently with his wife while the female SS teacher divorced her husband thinking that male teacher was leaving his wife for her. Fluffing spicy as a 17-year-old lol. Mrs. X, who was always the jerk app English teacher, she hated the more inappropriate parts of our app English books. Turns her husband cheated on her and she was in the middle of an unpleasant divorce. No wonder she couldn't stand any happy fun time in famous literature. I'm not sorry for feeling she was a jerk, but boy, did it make a lot more sense. Not a teacher, but my mom is a teacher at a school I went to and I still learned a few things. Two things come to mind. The kinda reserved science teacher has full sleeve tattoos. That was a bit of a surprise. Every year the school does a raffle with a bunch of cool little items in it. I found out recently that it's rigged to go to a poor student. I mean, I'm not complaining, but I always really wanted to win it. I was shocked when I found this out. Rampant smoking. I work at the school I attended. Nothing weird, but drinking, hanging out with your former teachers and principals is kinda cool honestly. I was a terrible math student but always pulled A's in geometry. Turns out my mom had been sucking off Mr. Davis, my teacher. I work in it at my old school district. All the teachers are just as immature as the students they teach, and most of the nicer teachers turn out to be slongs and horrible to work with. Also, everything is political and cliquey. You should hear the way teacher talk about students. They are brutally honest in teachers' meeting. This is kinda related, I'd say, it's about my school rather than the teachers. My high school had a theater and put on one huge production every year, along with smaller things like talent shows and such throughout the year. There was a light and sound crew open to any student that worked on building the sets alongside setting up lights and sound. I was on the crew for a while, and the leader was a teacher, director I highly respect, but he was also super chill and a good judge of character, trusting us with keys and access to stuff students would never see. One of my friends who was higher up in the crew unlocked and took us through some tunnels underneath the school. I had no idea that they ran underneath around 75% of the school. Our high school was pretty large, 1,000 plus people edit, large for my city. Okay guys. You had to crouch to go through at some points, and there was even a trapdoor from them that was in a janitor's closet attached to a teacher's lounge. It's funny to think that I've walked past the wall the closet was behind so many times and never knew that there was a trapdoor to underground tunnels that I never thought were there. Edit, added detail. Oh man, I've definitely got one. I worked in the same department as my old teacher, one of the people who made me want to be a teacher. It was pretty cool. One day we're at a bar and he's telling me his biggest horror stories and mentions a girl that I knew from high school. Turns out she was selling blowjobs during class under the stairs. We only found out because she confessed it to my co-teacher. Apparently some kids had not paid her and she was really upset about the whole ordeal and she thought my colleague would be the only one who would listen. He was quite shocked to say the least. She was right, and he worked with the right counselors in the school to get her back on track and deal with some trauma. It never really spread around the school and I walked with her when I graduated. It was another checkmark on the list of why I looked up to him as a teacher though, and I try to be as open about listening to my students now. Edit, for some clarification since I don't want him to come off as a jerk. This stemmed from me speaking to him about a student confessing to buying drugs for their family. I was a new teacher and I was not fond of having to be a mandatory reporter. His advice stemmed from this story and other horror stories, that reporting to the right people can actually make someone better. He wasn't just bragging about somebody I might have known. Ooh. This is a good one. I realized that my first grade teacher, who I adored, was the butt of all the other teachers' jokes, and that our principal, who I also adored, was actively trying to get her fired. You see the other end of the environment. Burnout, negativity, factions and cliques. IDK. You kind of assume as an elementary school student that your teachers that preach kindness, cooperation, etc. also do that with the people around them, but I've learned that sometimes, teachers are worse than the kids. A lot students weed past just BC because we don't want to deal with them anymore, or because their failure would hurt funding and we were pressured to overlook failure of certain students. My school had an old lunchroom, an entire portion of the building that was only accessible through 2 doors. I cannot say with certainty that this is true, but rumor has it several teachers ended up turning that room into a suitable living area and slept there for a few months. I didn't think it was that crazy until I remembered at least 2 of those teachers had a history of drug use, LSD, MDMA and cocaine. What went on in that old lunchroom is anyone's guess. Didn't go back as a teacher but learnt from another teacher who I met in the pub that my Year 9 chemistry teacher is a less interesting Walter White.